Right, I'm going to take you into the affective domain, to quote Nick, and just think about some of the emotional resonances that I've noticed in using these recipe books we've got at the Wellcome Library with non-academic audiences particularly. We have a very keen academic audience from around the world who come to use the material at the library, as well as online. And I'm not saying that these ideas that I'm going to talk about don't apply to them as well. I think everybody who comes across the recipe books has a very strong reaction to them in a very kind of personal way. But I think it's interesting to think about how you can use that very kind of gut emotional reaction in general audiences who wouldn't really think that they were interested in 17th century manuscripts until you showed them one of these volumes. Right, so the manuscript I'm going to really hang it around is this recipe book here, which was created by, or for, Anne Fanshawe in around 1651, and then it was added to and sort of it grew over the next 50 years or so. It's one of my favourite manuscripts in the library. I think if I had to save one thing from the burning stack, it would probably be this one. Although it's not the most valuable, it's not the most beautiful. So a bit like the ruined, was it the ruined cottage? I forget, that you really like. Yeah, this is mine. And we've all got a guilty pleasure, haven't we, in our stacks. It doesn't look particularly exotic when you look at it. It's quite battered. When I first came across it, the gatherings were all broken. It was in a bit of a state, mainly by terrible overhandling in the library, I have to admit, rather than its history before it came to the library. So we've since had it conserved properly. And I've really picked this because it's a really nice example of the genre as a whole. So we've got about 75 of these manuscripts from the 17th century in the library. The reason I think these are particularly nice to talk about in a sort of emotional way is because if I say recipe book to a general audience, I'll say it to you, you all immediately have an idea of what a recipe book is in your heads, don't you? It doesn't seem a scary concept. It seems like a very mundane, everyday item that most people will have some experience of using or seeing someone use in their everyday life. And so I think those kind of subjective experiences of this kind of text are really useful because they enable you then to actually, with an audience, try and mind the gap between what people think they know about a recipe book and what actually a 17th century recipe book might tell them. There's a very nice kind of dissonance, I think, between those two concepts. I think people find, there's a pimple recipe, people find the recipes in these 17th century recipes, I think particularly engaging because they cover medicinal as well as food recipes. So the woman of the household who would have been compiling these volumes would have been putting in medicinal things. She was acting as the kind of first aider of the family, potentially of the local area as well, particularly if she was of a quite high social status. She would be acting as the kind of apothecary and the local physician. And so immediately when people look at these, they get a real sense of the kind of continuities of human frailty, over hundreds of years. There's all these recipes in here which, I challenge anybody in this room not to have needed or, may need at some point in the future. So let me know and I can give you the references. The one at the bottom is particularly nice. It's a medicine for the piles in the fundament, being red, sore, aching, bleeding, especially when they go to stool, and that with great pain. There's a lot of content in these recipe books which is completely impenetrable. The names of diseases we don't recognise today. The treatments we certainly don't recognise, or they seem a bit crazy by our standards, although they had a rationale obviously at the time. But immediately somebody can look at those and think, that's a person who was like me, very physical. You can imagine the sort of corporeal author of the volume, I think, very nicely. And the volumes themselves have a real range of content. So some volumes have an awful lot of skin creams and kind of pimple removers. So you get a sense of the woman who's compiling that volume. And then other volumes have, say, a predominance of cancer cures. So you get, again, a very strong sense of a trajectory over a lifetime of gathering these more and more desperate remedies into one volume. So the volume almost comes to represent the person, I think, very strongly for people. Another reason that people find these very emotionally engaging in a very easy way is that you often get a lot of direct comments written into them which actually speak to you as you're reading it. So there's a recipe here for a remedy to be taken after miscarriage. It's not to actually provoke a miscarriage. and this again is from Anne Fanshaw's book. So you can see at the bottom that she's written, put into the broth just as you drink it, I'm not sure what that word is, I'm afraid. Tell me, treads? The treads of 9 eggs. I'm not sure what they are. I have found good experimentally of this medicine. You get quite a lot of this kind of anecdote and little amendments, notes in the margin in the recipe books. So you get a real strong sense that you're actually in communication with somebody from 400 years ago, I think, if you're very new to looking at manuscript material. In terms of the format of the volumes themselves, they vary massively. Some of them are very expensive, clearly. They've been written up as beautiful, pristine, fair copies, beautiful calligraphy, very lovely vellum, very beautiful paper, enormous sometimes, very, very heavy things. They clearly weren't always used in the sense that often a general audience assumes they were used. So I think this is quite a nice one to show to somebody. It's not Anne Fanshawe, clearly, it's a different one. Because it enables you to ask questions about, why do you think these volumes were actually created? This one looks like it's been used in some way. It's also been burnt. You could guess that it was during the making of the barley cream, that somebody's got on that page. Mm. It goes all the way through the volume virtually, this burn. It was also quite a big cinder that fell out on the, from the fire on top of it. I'm guessing, but then it could be nothing to do with the cooking. It could be that somebody was just reading it. In a
dragon's blood.
Hmm?
Well, it's not dragon's blood.
Dragon's blood falling through, it could be, yeah. But it raises lots of questions about, was this volume used? Who used it? So would it have been the person who wrote it who used it? Would it have been used by a servant? Would it have been used in the sense of actually somebody having it with them as they cooked something? Or was it used as a form of status and showing off? Obviously, you all work with manuscripts, so you're very aware of these kind of questions. But to an audience that is not necessarily used to thinking about them, it's a very nice, powerful message, I think, that you can draw from this kind of volume.